Hey there, my name is James Thompson. Welcome to class. This is Auditor Skills 101, the fundamentals of auditing. And hopefully you've taken a course or two from us before. If not, welcome to class. If you have, welcome back. I wanted to take a few minutes and focus specifically on the skills of auditing. So really to kind of strip away the requirements of 9001, 19011, and all these other standards, and really get down to some fundamental baseline skills that I've developed over the years. I've been auditing now for about 30 years. I started as an intern, so I've learned a lot along the way, and I wanted to bundle that in a separate class as really a starting point for a lot of students that have never audited before. Maybe you've worked in a position for years and you've been audited, but what does it take at a fundamental skills level to be a good auditor, to produce good results, and then how do you go about honing those skills, sharpening those skills over time? So that's really what this course is all about. So let me share my screen here. You can learn more about Concentric Global by virtue of this little link here to our website, and we are a certified training provider for Exemplar Global. All right, so what is the purpose? What's the course of objectives in taking this course, and what's the purpose of this type of course? And a couple things here. One is I want you to learn the origins of audit requirements in various management systems. So what is prompting the need to have good auditing skills? Also, I want you to develop the basic skills needed to be an effective auditor. I mean, you're not going to be auditing too much if you don't come up with effective skills at finding good results. I want to highlight the importance of audit planning. That's probably the step that's overlooked the most, is the importance of actually doing proper planning before you go out and start conducting interviews or looking at evidence and that sort of thing. I also want to look at the use of the PDCA approach in auditing. PDCA is Plan, Do, Check, Act. If you've taken another class, you've probably studied that a time or two, or have seen that referenced in various international standards. The other thing is tips. I want to give you tips on questioning techniques so you can be more efficient and effective at gathering information just by virtue of changing the way that you communicate or ask questions of the auditee. Audits are conducted for typically one or more of the following reasons. So first of all, to ensure compliance. So a lot of these standards require you to have an auditing program or customer specifics. Your customers require you to have an auditing program to monitor yourselves internally. Another thing would be to determine the effectiveness of whether or not you're meeting your own objectives, and that might be in quality, environmental, financial, health and safety, information security, so on and so forth. You might also be auditing just to explore opportunities for improvement. Where can you save money? Where can you cut costs, make processes more efficient? Where are your risks? That sort of thing. This bullet actually addresses that, is to prevent problems before they occur. So risk-based thinking to meet statutory and or regulatory requirements. So a lot of state, federal, and organizations, governance will require you to have some sort of self-monitoring and auditing in place as a part of your management system, and to provide feedback to top management through, it says, a representative sample. So it's really, you're an extension of the eyes and ears of the leadership and the top management of the organization. So go out, take some sampling, and bring back information that then can be communicated to that leadership team to verify or provide evidence otherwise to something working as intended. And then the piece that really kind of pushes a lot of students through seeking training, seeking certification, and that sort of thing, is the requirement to have a certain level of competency as a second or third-party recognition. So be it your customer is certifying you, for example, if you're providing parts to Ford, let's say, Ford has a requirement for having an internal auditing program. So to get that Ford Q1 recognition, you'd have to have an auditing program in place, or third-party recognition being from a certification body. These are the standards that are prompted primarily by ISO under the internal auditing clause that really set the stage and become the catalyst for our students to go through training like this. In this case, that internal auditing clause for the three major standards, and you'll see a lot of the slides will be focused on these three major standards, which is 9001, 14,001, and 45,001. Clause 9.2 is where you see those internal auditing requirements in those standards. In that clause, there are requirements that basically say that you have to have audits that are planned to provide information on, and let me get this little laser pointer deal here so it's a little easier for you to kind of follow along as I'm talking. So you have to conduct audits internally at planned intervals to provide information really to the organization on meeting the QMS or EMS or OH&S management system requirements. So when you see this, that's kind of the X is really a marker for a variable that applies to all these management systems. But as a part of meeting management system requirements, and then also meeting standard requirements. So in short, what this is saying is you need to have planned audits to make sure that you're meeting your own internal requirements and the requirements, the minimum requirements that are listed in the standards. So for example, in ISO 9001, that would be a total of 321 requirements in that standard that you would need to be planning audits in order to verify that you're meeting those requirements from 9001. The other thing is you want to make sure that you're auditing certain parts of your management system to make sure that all of the moving pieces and individual processes within your company, within your organization, are effectively implemented. So you're not just doing work activity, but you're doing activity in a way that's effective, that makes sense to the strategy of your company, that works as intended within your operating system, so on and so forth. And then you want to make sure that your system, your management system, is maintained. So improvement or excellence is not a place that you end up. It's a point in time, a snapshot in time. Can you manage your system and maintain that high level of compliance and beyond? That's something that really is the catalyst for these clauses 9.2 in these three major standards as well as others. And then you see an annotation here that you'll see in a few other slides where the X here represents kind of any management system across the board, primarily QMS, EMS, and OH&S. So another thing that 9.2 in these three standards align on is the auditing program and what it needs to consider. So the auditing program needs to consider the importance of the processes within your company. One process might have a larger effect or more direct effect to a customer than the other. So process importance changes, any significant changes either that have taken place already or that will take place in the near future, and then previous audit results. So if there were poor results from audits previously, then you should consider maybe bumping up the frequency, the competency, the depth in which you go and audit that area. The other thing is your audit program and the audits that you go do, they need to go in the very early stages through a process of determining what the criteria of the audit is and what the scope of the audit is. A lot of times I'll see audit teams and they've got an audit scheduled and they just kind of, sporadically go out and do an audit without sitting down and saying, okay, what is the reason that we're doing this audit? Do we have a new customer? Have we had a lot of complaints? Do we have a new configuration to a design? Is there a new material we're using? Do we have an entirely new shift of employees that we never had before? So really laying out what is our objective, what's our criteria that we're going to go audit to, what are the standards and the requirements we're going to audit to, and then what's the boundary of that audit? Because you could slowly find yourself kind of going through and doing an audit and talking to people and not really having a very clear picture of the purpose if you don't define that up front. And it's easier to get, off of scope, especially if you don't have a clear scope defined in the first place. The other thing is auditor selection. You need to make sure that you're selecting your audits and you're conducting your audits with objectivity and impartiality. And in the past, there's been some other requirements that's been added to this. There's a note here. It says, the statement that said auditors shall not audit their own work. It actually used to say, and so that statement has been removed, and that was taken out in the previous release. So in 9001 and 14001, when those two changed in the 2015 version, this statement was removed. And really the long and short of it is that the main thing you want to make sure that you're doing is you've got to balance the objectivity and impartiality with technical competence. So the idea here is you want to be able to get, into the weeds of the processes that you're auditing, but you don't want to be unfair. You don't want to use the audit to be a punitive exercise. You don't want, let's say, to audit somebody in the office that maybe you have some sort of conflict with, and now you're using the audit process as a chance to kind of, pay them back or whatever crazy non-impartial or emotional issues. You kind of want to, you absolutely want to leave those out of the auditing process. So one way I've seen, and I'll talk a little bit about this later in the class, where you can balance that objectivity and that impartiality with the depth of auditing, is to come up with an audit team that's more than just one person. So an audit team can be one or more auditors, but if you could get 2 or 3 auditors, it really helps to balance the scale, especially if you have let's say a really good, advanced, highly skilled auditor that may not technically know how to audit, let's say a lab process or a chemical process or something like that. Bringing along another auditor or 2 that is really savvy in that particular subject to get down and really understand what you're observing, that to me is a best practice. That's something that I encourage you to do. But I wanted to highlight the fact that this previously saying auditors shall not audit their own work has been taken out, and auditors shall not audit their own area was also in there as a 2 revisions ago. So all that's been pulled out, but the idea is you want to make sure you're selecting good auditors that have a competency in what they're auditing to a certain degree, a reasonable level, and you're being objective and impartial. So moving on here, audit results need to be reported to relevant management. And in the case of the 45,001 standard, it says, audit results need to be reported to workers as well. So those workers that are relevant and that apply to whatever the finding is that you have, that information needs to get down to the worker, not just the management. But basically saying, don't just audit and then put your findings away in a file somewhere. You need to make sure that if you're auditing to a process, that your findings are shared and clear to the relevant management and ownership in that area, because thinking back, what is the purpose of all this? And really kind of wrapping in this next bullet point, which is undue delay, really in reacting to your findings. The primary issue here with regard to kind of the end point or the output of audits is that is then the starting point or the input into taking action, whether that's preventive action, corrective action, mitigating risk, capital improvements, whatever. The idea is, and a lot of times you get some confusion between what is the auditing portion and what's the action portion. But I look at it as auditing is finding, and once you've really documented clearly what your findings are, the next process is fixing. So those are two distinct functions, but it's really important for an auditor to ensure that the information is reported clearly and to the relevant management that it needs to be reported to. And then the quality side, the quality standard says you have to have undue delay in correction and corrective action. Okay, so what that means is, it's not the responsibility of the auditing process to monitor the timeliness of a response, because that's out of your scope. If your job is to find and present objective evidence on the condition of something, work activities in a certain area or whatever, you're not also responsible for closing the corrective action or making sure that it's been addressed in a timely manner. That's out of scope from the auditing process, and we start getting into the continuous improvement processes or the correction or corrective and preventive action processes. But one of the other requirements here that's shared across the board with these standards is retaining documented information. And this piece is broken into kind of two sub points here. One is the reason that you want to retain documented information, which AKA is a record, is for evidence of an effective auditing program, number one, but of course, number two, evidence of audit results. So that's the one we typically pay the most attention to, but I think that there's a lot of power from my experience in terms of reviewing the evidence of an audit to make sure your audits are actually, worth spending the time on. So have you done an effective audit? Did you come up with findings that would be consistent with an auditor that is best in class? How far away are you from just checking compliance on everything and quickly, running through a spreadsheet versus going on and documenting and communicating the clear picture of opportunities for improvement, or are you complying and to what degree are you not complying, that sort of thing. And then the final note that you see here that's referenced in all three of these standards is pointing to this this standard called the ISO 19011, which is a guidance document that's deliberately written and noted in each of these standards, as well as several other standards that are out there for management systems. So this slide is meant to really prompt you, and it might be a good idea to actually ask yourself this question, think about it, hit pause on the video. But the idea is, without even getting into the details here, look at the scorecard below. So in this case, you got a couple bits of information. What's the business goal? Business goal number 3 is 15% profit margin. Okay, so just looking at this, where would you audit? If you're looking at, well, why aren't we on target, or why might we be off target at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year, with regard to goal number 3, which is profit margin. So take a minute here and pause the video and think about, where would you audit? Where would you audit within this organization, just looking at this limited information? Okay, next slide. So similar question here, looking at the metrics below. And again, it just first and foremost, starting with data is always a good idea, but answer the following question. And these are a little bit tricky, but it's just meant to get you to kind of think a little bit about some real world type evidence and data and scenarios. So first question is, what are the measures here telling us? Okay, so these measures are primarily around machine maintenance or uptime, or it's related really to asset management in the maintenance management system. But what are these indicators telling us? Who's at fault and which employee should be punished? So again, take a second, look at this information, pause the video, and think about or discuss with your group the answer to these three questions. Okay, so this is real simple. What are the measures here telling us? So a couple of things. Number one is just going back to start with data. It's very important that you start with some sort of health scorecard, process indicators, key process indicators, whatever, objectives and targets. But those indicators give you a lot of insight, assuming that they're correct, assuming that the data is accurate, gives you a lot of insight into um, which audit trails are hot, which ones are cold, what you should be planning um, uh, in terms of the audit trails, what the questions might be, so on and so forth. So without that data, it becomes really a lot more difficult to have findings that are actually worth anything. So what you're going to get from these measures that you're seeing here is, so once again, let me go back to sharing my screen. So what are the measures telling us? The measures are telling us primarily that we have a problem in our maintenance process, not maintenance department, but we've got some issues here with these objectives. Now you could say, all right, we're on budget. Okay, so we're green there. And as an auditor, I'm used to auditees sometimes playing this game called let's highlight the good stuff. So yes, you are well under budget for your maintenance expense here. But what about mean time between failure? So you're failing a lot. The machine is failing. It basically says the current value is 32 days. The target is 90 days. So the target is to get up here and have 90 days of the machine running before it typically fails. And you're in this scenario looking at data that says the machine shuts down every 30 days. So but you're not getting into who's at fault. That, like, stay away from that. That's something that um I'll talk about throughout this courses. You want to stay away from auditing being of us, of people or a certain person. You want to stay away from this habit that you might come into an audit and looking at this as punitive, and you're there and you're the authority, and you demand respect, all that stuff. Or like, no, nobody's at fault here, and we're not out there to look at who's at fault. What we're out there to do when we're auditing is trying to figure out, okay, are we meeting the requirements of the standard? Are we meeting the requirements of our own company? Are we meeting the requirements of our customer? Or are there gaps in our work steps, our documentation, our activities? Are we skipping over something? And same thing for this next, the third question is, which employee should be punished? Well, this is not about punishing people. This is about going out and taking a snapshot in time of the conditions of some portion, or sometimes a very large portion, of the full management system. Okay, it's taking a snapshot, bringing that evidence forward, so that the next stage, which is action, can have a good place to start. Okay, so some trick questions in here to try to pull you off sides, but this is something worth discussing. Is, especially if you're doing this exercise in a group, if you did this exercise in a group, what did others say within your group? Was there a response saying, oh, the maintenance manager needs to be punished, or this person, the maintenance department, isn't doing what they're supposed to do? You don't know enough yet to know the source of the breakdowns, and you can't conclude, or you shouldn't conclude, um, early on in your auditing process, that this is one department's issue versus another. We're not there to look at that. We're there to look at, all right, the process is supposed to go from A to Z, and we see that there are gaps in C and M and Q. Okay, and we present that data in a fair, objective, and rich way that then can be the starting point for leadership to say, okay, I understand the current condition, and here's what we're going to do about it. Okay. So let's do the next slide, and let's look at, see here, this. So let's go over some terms and some definitions here.